Hello, students of Arkansas history. I'm going to be talking with you today about political and racial violence in post-Reconstruction Arkansas. Particularly one conflict I'll be talking about is the Plumerville conflict of 1886 to 1892. Now, this lecture in particular is going to deal with pretty much the most famous case of political violence, and that is the assassination of a political candidate named John Clayton. Okay, so official title of this lecture is Who Shot and Killed John Clayton? Now, there is a book by a historian named Ken Barnes that is out there. There is an old documentary that is out there that I use, also created by Ken Barnes. One is called Who Shot John Clayton, one is called Who Killed John Clayton. Those are both excellent sources. There's the encyclopedia article on the Arkansas Online Encyclopedia. So there are several good sources out there, and I've shared some of them with you if you're a student in the class on our Blackboard platform. So let's talk about the Plumerville conflict. During the late 1880s, electoral politics of Conway County turned violent, resulting in serious injuries, several deaths, especially in the Plumerville community. So when I talk about Conway, I mean Conway County, rather. I mean Morrilton, Plumerville, Lewisburg. And this political violence really accelerates in the 1880s, and this gives way to increased racial violence. So due to political violence that would plague this time period in Plumerville, a Republican candidate and a relative of former governor and former Union Cavalry officer Powell Clayton is murdered. And again, Clayton is one of these most famous cases of political violence following Reconstruction in Arkansas. So in Conway County, like Morrilton, there were a lot of people who were sympathetic to the Confederacy. So pre-Civil War, Conway County is very divided ideologically. If communities like Lewisburg, which was sympathetic to secession, the lower part of Conway County was less sympathetic to secession. Both Conway, Morrilton, and Conway in Faulkner County are both located on the river. They both contain railroads. Both have farming of cotton is a major activity, and plantation owners there that depend on slaves. So during the Civil War, there was a lot of feuding between Union and Rebel sympathizers in Conway County, and chaos and anarchy plagued the countryside as a result. There was a man named Thomas Jefferson Williams who led guerrilla activities against rebels in north central Arkansas. They were dubbed Williams Raiders, or Williams Company of Scouts and Spies. They scouted for the 3rd Arkansas Union Cavalry garrisoned at Lewisburg in Conway County. Now, there was a rebel guerrilla company led by Allen R. Witt. They were based out of Quitman in Cleburne County, about 20 miles east of Thomas Jefferson Williams Farm, near Center Ridge in Conway County. So from 1863 to 1865, Williams and Witt waged an ongoing feud against one another, as did the families in the area known to be sympathetic to either side that's playing into this conflict. On the night of February 12th, 1865, approximately 60 members of Witt's band surround Williams' home and shot and killed him as he opened the door. So let's fast forward to post-Civil War and Reconstruction. If you'll remember from our previous conversation about the militia war and Powell Clayton administration, you have the Constitutional Convention of 1868, which disallowed Confederates from voting, and Republicans are unanimously elected across the state. This leads to the election of Powell Clayton as governor of Arkansas in 1868. He is this former Union cavalry officer, an Arkansas farmer, bought a plantation here in the state, and he was viewed as a carpetbagger. The KKK resisted and organized against the Clayton government, and Clayton, as a result, declared martial law in several counties, Conway County being one of them. One evening, the KKK stormed into the house of two black brothers, lynching one and shooting the other. A man named Thomas Hooper. He had lost his hat in the incident and is later found and killed by Clayton's militiamen. John Clayton, he had gained a lot of political experience relative to Pal Clayton. In the 1870s, he was elected as a representative. He also served in the Arkansas Senate. Staunch Brooks supporter in the Brooks-Baxter War. Led troops against the Baxter faction. And Clayton had the support of black voters. He served as a sheriff of Jefferson County in 1876 and was reelected 5 times. Reconstruction ends in 1874, and by the 1870s, the railroad comes in and brings many new settlers. Railroads made Morrilton grow. Conway County, as a result, experiences a serious influx of African American settlement, which would decline greatly by the 1890s. But in this post-Reconstruction period, it is increasing rapidly. Now, migration of people of color into certain counties made them a black majority. Right? So this population could and would challenge controlling Democrats. So white farmers in this period stopped voting Democrat in favor of the agricultural party or the populist party movement that was springing up, and that splintered the Democratic Party. Now, they did this in hopes of making life better for farmers, but due to the split in the party, the Republicans are able to win in 1884. This is when the KKK begins making nightly raids on Republicans. By the mid to late 1880s, the agricultural wheel and the rise of the populist movement united poor people, white and black, for common shared interests. They sought to cut out the middlemen that were driving up their prices, store owners, bankers, railroads. The agricultural wheel is a cooperative alliance of farmers in the United States, which sprung up spontaneously in Arkansas in 1882. It was formed in protest against the effects that had been brought on by the Civil War and Reconstructions and the difficulties that farmers were experiencing due to sparsely settled communities, which were attempting to adapt to changes in commercialized agriculture and also to deal with the effects of the previous reliance on a one-crop farming based approach, and also the issues that were occurring with crop lien systems that were in place. Also, there's widespread lawlessness and corruption during this time. So the poor, black and white alike, eventually began fielding candidates, and this is what really begins to threaten the control of the Democratic Party in the state. In 1886, Republicans win again. A black Republican preacher is elected in Conway County, and in Plumerville, Republican candidate John Clayton ran for U.S. Congress against a Democrat incumbent, Clifton R. Breckinridge. The Democrats wanted the county back and asked they show up to the election, ask if the votes in the race had been counted yet. The ballot box is then stolen and burned by two brothers, the Bentleys. Clayton loses the election and announces that he's going to contest the results arrives in 1889 to investigate the stolen ballot box. This is when Oliver Bentley, a deputy sheriff, appears, and this is who appears to have been the mastermind behind the ballot box theft, according to historian Ken Barnes, author of Who Killed John Clayton. Oliver Bentley had also an older brother, George, that had fought in the Militia War of 1868 and had served as an interim sheriff at one point in his career. And in 1888, he is actually also the town marshal of Morrilton. So Clayton loses by a narrow margin, 846 out of 34,000 votes cast. So in late January of 89, he came to Plumerville. And two men draw straws to see who would kill Clayton. The man drawing the short straw would be who would carry out the act. The man who drew the short straw was a man named Pate. He stood outside Clayton's parlor window and blasted Clayton in the head with buckshot, essentially blowing his head off. Deputy Sheriff Oliver Bentley found two frozen footprints at the scene. The Democrats claimed that Clayton's murder was a random act of violence, while the Republicans maintained that it was a politically motivated killing. Clayton's brothers believed that county officials would shade the killers from justice. So Pinkerton detective is hired to investigate the murder. He's run out of town. George Bentley had actually begun, brother of Oliver Bentley, deputy sheriff, had begun communications with the detective and began negotiations to become a government witness concerning the ballot box theft. Well, on November 27th, Oliver Bentley shot and killed George in the presence of a single witness named William Wood. Wood was one of 5 of the men who entered Plumerville on the night of the election when the ballot box was stolen. The two brothers and then Wood and then another 2 men. They concocted this story that they were examining a Smith & Wesson revolver in Wood's saddle shop in Morrilton when the gun discharged accidentally, shooting George Bentley in the head, killing him instantly. The sheriff and the coroner both rule George Bentley's death to be an accident. Barnes cites this in his book. George Bentley's grandson recalled being told later in his life, throughout his life, how his grandfather was shot accidentally 5 times in the head by his brother. After the Pinkerton investigation falls through with the witness being willing to cooperate with George Bentley being killed, then a black man named Joe Smith is hired and killed. Smith found a person who he said could identify the thieves of the ballot box and the murderer. Then he is murdered, and his killer is found and arrested and then released by the Democrats on a technicality. This is an example of prominent white men in Plumerville and Morrilton all covering up and covering for one another, just as the Republicans suspect. Pinkerton Detective Agency is never able to make a case here. So despite the Arkansas and national press condemning Clayton's murder as a violent political crime, offering a $5,000 reward, investigations by Pinkerton detective agencies, and a study by the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Elections, no murder was ever found. The House of Representatives found that Clayton had indeed won the election in 1888 and declared the congressional seat vacant on the account of his death. Now, after serving almost the entire term, Breckinridge loses his seat in Congress. The democratic process, due to all of these happenings, is a mockery in Morrilton. There were poll taxes, Jim Crow laws, and conditions were demoralized, dark, and gloomy for blacks in the state and in Conway County. If you were illiterate, you couldn't vote in the 1890s. By this time, the Democrats got to a point where they didn't need to steal ballot boxes anymore because they were filling the state positions with Democrats. African Americans gave up their rights in hopes that they had won in the Civil War during this time, and colored people even began to desire to migrate back to Africa due to the conditions of places like we're discussing here with these incidences in Arkansas, to a colony there known as Liberia in Western Africa. Two parties of 100 people settled in Liberia from Arkansas, and the black population of the 1890s in Conway County began to decline. The conspirators against the African American population in Arkansas became sheriffs, judges, members of the House of Representatives. Now, following the assassination of John Clayton, politicians in Little Rock will check the influence of poor blacks and whites. Election reforms are made and the rules and system are changed to prevent something like this happening again. Secret ballot and poll tax legislation ensures that this demographic will not be voting in the numbers they had before. According to historian Ken Barnes, once the poor are no longer a threat, political violence really comes to an end in the state. Now, while political violence does come to an end, racial violence continues in the early 1890s with grotesque spectacle lynchings in Arkansas. One example is that of Edward Coy of Texarkana, who's lynched in the late 1800s. He is a 32-year-old African-American man who was burned before a crowd of approximately 1,000 people. More people showed up to watch the lynching than actually lived in the town, meaning that people in the countryside knew that the lynching was going to happen and came out of the countryside into the town to watch it happen. This murder is described as one of the most shocking and repulsive in the history of lynching. Coy was accused of having raped a Mrs. Jewell, a white woman. Coy was described as a mulatto, and the woman in the case is who sets fire to Coy at this lynching. So racial, not political violence was carried out as a reminder that African American rights no longer existed. And Coy's lynching was in 1892. So that is going to be the conclusion of our lecture on political violence in post-Reconstruction Arkansas and our examination of the Plumerville conflict from 1886 to 1892. And there is an assignment posted for you in the Chapter 10 folder on Blackboard going over who shot and killed John Clayton. So be sure you check that out and let me know if you have any questions. It's been good going over this with you, and we'll be talking with everyone soon. Thank you.